Freight trains are dangerous to Americans in ways that we don't even think about. Nobody really tells us about. What we do hear about, and we should of course, is like what happened in East Palestine and the horrible derailment and aftermath there. But what I want to talk about today is something we don't hear much about, but really can be quite dangerous to our health. And that is the diesel exhaust that comes from freight trains, the freight train locomotives specifically. Now, who is it dangerous to? Well, if you think about all of the people who live in homes, children who go to school, people who frequent businesses all along the rail corridors where these freight trains pass through, what you understand is the community of Americans who are breathing this very dangerous diesel exhaust that is coming out of these freight trains constantly, out of their locomotives. As I say, it's a very dangerous chemical, and I want to tell you about some of the detail of that now. What is in this thing we call diesel exhaust? Well, diesel exhaust is actually a name for the collection of dozens of chemicals. You can think of it as kind of a cocktail of dangerous chemicals. Each one of them is dangerous in its own right. Some that you've probably heard of, benzene, for example, carbon monoxide, certainly we've heard of that, formaldehyde, sulfur dioxide. That and dozens more chemicals are all in diesel exhaust that's going out into these communities, and people are breathing it. Sometimes they know it because it smells so bad, so they know something's wrong, but some people have gotten so used to breathing it and having it in their lungs and in their system that they're numb to it and they don't really know it. And what they're risking, really, what is being risked, are short-term health effects like respiratory disease, asthma, or aggravation of asthma, heart disease. Those are shorter term, sometimes called acute effects of breathing in dangerous diesel exhaust. There are longer term effects, chronic effects. Specifically, what I'm talking about there is cancer and lung cancer. There's a worldwide agency very respected for research in cancer. It's called the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, I-A-R-C. They study chemicals to determine whether they cause cancer or not. And then it classifies them in different groups depending upon how dangerous they are to human health. Group 1 in IARC is the most dangerous grouping of chemicals. It is for human carcinogens, specifically known human carcinogens, chemicals known to cause cancer in human beings. IARC has classified diesel exhaust as a Group 1 known human carcinogen. Very little in our society is more dangerous to human health than breathing diesel exhaust. That's just a fact. State of California recognizes it. It recognizes that diesel exhaust is responsible for a very significant increase in its overall cancer risk to its people in that state. The state of Washington has concluded that more than 70% of the total cancer risk in that state due to air pollution is from diesel exhaust, more than 70%. In Illinois, the largest 12 counties in the entire state, that's mainly Chicago and the surrounding area, the largest 12 counties are among the riskiest in the whole country where breathing diesel exhaust is concerned and the health effects of breathing diesel exhaust, the 12 riskiest in the entire country. In fact, things are about to get significantly worse for the residents of those 12 counties in Illinois. What I'm talking about is recently there was a merger that was granted by a federal regulator in Chicago. What that means is the regulator allowed two large railroad companies to merge to form an even larger railroad company with lots more freight train traffic going through Chicago and the surrounding communities. Those surrounding communities that are already among the filthiest in the country where diesel exhaust is concerned. Here are some statistics that illustrate what I'm talking about. There will be, as a result of this merger, 300 to 600% more freight traffic on the railroads going through those communities every day. Every day, 300 to 600% more. Another way to illustrate it, and I think this is very dramatic and really punctuates how bad this is going to be. Every year now, 11,000 more carloads of toxic chemicals will be rumbling down the train tracks in those communities. 11,000 more every year, filled with toxic chemicals, and these communities have no idea what's in them because they're not being told, because the railroads don't want to tell them, and because the federal regulators aren't requiring the railroads to tell these communities what's in those horribly dangerous rail cars, the ones that caused all of the problems in East Palestine. One of the stories I heard out of East Palestine really tells you kind of what's going on here and how dangerous it is that these communities don't know what's in these toxic carloads going through their towns. What happened was that shortly after the derailment, you all heard, we all witnessed the chemicals being burned in those cars. We were told that the chemicals had to be burned by the tens of thousands of gallons so that they didn't explode. Imagine the choice that had to be made. Well, the point of this story is the person who had to make the choice. And the person who had to make the choice was the fire chief of East Palestine. Now, I don't mean any disrespect to the fire chief of East Palestine, but I can guarantee you that the fire chief had absolutely no training in understanding what he was supposed to do when a derailment of those kinds of chemicals happened, because no one told him. How could he possibly have been aware? Well, what we're asking for now, especially with that merger and all the additional rail traffic going through the Chicagoland area, is we're inviting more East Palestinians. And that's a shame because it's so unnecessary. There were communities in the Chicagoland area which were very vigorous in their opposition to the merger, and I don't blame them one bit. They were very concerned about being the site of another East Palestine. No doubt they were concerned about the diesel exhaust and all of the disruption that these trains, these freight trains, and the additional traffic would cause to their communities. The communities I'm talking about are Bartlett, Bensonville, Elgin, Itasca, Hanover Park, Roselle, Wooddale, Schaumburg, and DuPage County. All of them banded together and tried to persuade the regulator how dangerous and disruptive this merger would be to their communities, and the regulator just ignored them. In fact, the regulator granted the merger, ignoring statistics provided by these communities, statistics describing the danger. The regulator ignored their input and listened to the input of one of the rail companies that wanted the merger. Listened to the polluter, took the polluter's word for it about how much pollution the polluter was going to cause. Imagine. Well, after everything I've said, I want to get to what I think is the most important point here, and hopefully end on kind of a positive note after talking about all this danger. And that is, what do we do about all this? What can we possibly do? Are we just helpless in the face of the dangers presented by this horribly carcinogenic diesel exhaust? And no, we're not. I want to describe 5 things that we can do. In fact, things that should have been done a long time ago, but really should be done now, with East Palestine fresh in our memories and this merger that was just granted now, and the dangers of that confronting us. What can we do? Here are 5 things. One is test. Where do we test? Well, remember, I've been talking throughout about the homes, the schools, churches, parks, businesses, where the people there are breathing diesel exhaust. We should be testing in selected locations there. And why? Well, for one, those people have a right to know what they're breathing. They probably have smelled this toxic chemical for so long, the diesel exhaust, they may not even realize anymore that they're breathing it, or how frequently they're breathing it, how much of it they're breathing. And they are living in ignorance, and an ignorance that has been forced on them by the railroad companies and the regulators who do the bidding of the railroad companies. These people deserve to know what's in the air they are breathing. Now, if we do this kind of testing, I can guarantee you this, we're going to find high concentrations of diesel exhaust in homes, in bedrooms where people sleep at night, in classrooms where children go to school, in businesses where people go to shop every day. We're going to find it there. And it's about time, because when we find it there, that will drive action. Politicians will have to swing into action. Those kinds of test results can't be ignored. Now, the people who oppose this kind of testing, not surprisingly, the do-nothing regulators and the railroad companies, they don't want us to know because they know how bad they're going to look when the truth is discovered. Ignorance, especially an ignorance that forfeits people's health, is never the answer. People deserve to know. Number one, and I think most important, is test. Point number two has to do with the locomotives that power these freight trains that produce the diesel exhaust. Right now, many of these locomotives are 25 years old or older. And why is that significant? Well, one is they're horrible polluters. And two, the reason they're horrible polluters is by law, they only have to live by the emission standards, the diesel exhaust emission standards that were in place the year they were manufactured, so 25 or 30 years ago. And the emission standards were nothing for protecting our health. What needs to happen is in a few short years, 3 to 5 years from now, we need to be entirely off of diesel fuel burning locomotives. The technology is available and has been available for many years now and has been used by some railroad companies for zero emission locomotives, essentially battery powered locomotives. We see it in automobiles, we've seen it for years. It's available now. In fact, it's being used in freight train locomotives. That needs to be the law of the land. 3, we have to limit idling in communities. There's no reason why any properly operating freight train should have to idle for anything longer than 30 minutes, and that should be a rare exception. But idling really causes a lot of environmental and health damage because of all the diesel exhaust that is emitted in that process. California, with the new laws it wants passed, is limiting idling or proposing to limit idling of freight trains to 30 minutes. That ought to be it throughout the country. And eventually it ought to be down to nothing. And of course, if we get zero emission locomotives, then the problem of idling becomes less one of environmental damage and health damage and more about inconvenience, because the train is parked there and it's blocking an intersection, for example. And that's still bad, but it is no longer belching horrible diesel fuel, the carcinogenic diesel fuel and diesel exhaust, if we're on a zero emission battery powered locomotive. Number 4, limit the traffic. I gave you the example a few minutes ago of 300 to 600% increase in freight traffic in the Chicagoland area now coming as a result of the merger. No, can't be allowed to happen. The limit should be what it was before the merger and nothing more, right? People are owed that. The people who live in these communities right now are owed that. Too much disruption to their lives, too much danger. Well, you can really think of it this way, and this is the way we need to think of it, right? The rail merger was granted to increase the profits of the railroads that were involved. The regulators bend over backwards for the railroads because the railroads basically own the regulators, and the regulators are in business to increase the profitability of the railroads. Now, if that sounds tough, I can tell you that is what's true, and that's why we have things like East Palestine, and why we're lucky we don't have more, and it's only by luck that we don't have more, because we have an unregulated industry here, right? That's what's going on in the United States. And so we need to limit the amount of traffic that goes through these communities. We need to help these communities take back their health and take back their towns. When these railroads are permitted to merge, to rumble more freight trains through a town, for example, they're just making more money. And the biggest cost in all of that is not being recognized. And that's the cost, the burden, if you will, imposed on the health of the people in those communities. It's not even being recognized. It's not even being tested for. We're pretending there is no cost to these people when it's the greatest cost in all of this, right? And if we finally recognize that cost and we get some serious regulation, we limit traffic, we get zero emission technology for the locomotives, and we'll start to restore some dignity and health to the people who live in these communities. Number 5, and finally, we need to tell local communities what's in these toxic rail cars that are going through their towns and cities and villages every day. It is unacceptable that they are in the dark like the people of East Palestine were. Never again. They need to know it's a simple point about human decency and their ability to prepare for a possible disaster. So let me get to the bottom line of all of this. What we're really talking about is the health of the American people. I especially want to focus on children for just a second. One of the reasons we're so concerned about any human carcinogen like diesel exhaust that's being breathed by humans is that they are especially dangerous for children, sometimes up to 10 times more dangerous for children than they are for adults. That's the main reason why all of these things I've been talking about, the testing, the limiting of the idling, the zero emission locomotives, are so important. The state of California hopes to impose rules that will shortly prevent 3,000 premature deaths attributable only to exhaust, diesel exhaust from locomotives. That's a worthwhile goal we need to get to work on immediately.